10 ways the mainstream media lies to you. Lies, propaganda, the bending of the truth. You've probably seen it all before. In this video, we're going to explore the 10 ways the mainstream media manipulates your thinking and has you blindly following an agenda. Number 10. The impartiality illusion. So a mainstream media company needs a big audience to be a mainstream media company. And to get a big audience, they need talent to get the news and keep people interested. Without talented journalists, they can't make breaking news, and they just become another blog or a Philip DeFranco style character who simply reposts the news. Or they have to target a specific genre of news, such as gaming news, and therefore they're not a mainstream media company anymore because they're not doing media in the national or international interest. We're talking big audiences here. And obviously to get the talent, you have to employ lots of people and make lots of content. And for that, they need funding. And this comes from either adverts or a license fee. Now, British media is made for British audiences. So there's no such thing as impartiality on that front. For example, you won't find, or you'd be pushed to find, a British article in favour of the American Second Amendment, the right to bear arms.
We've spoken to many students caught up in this who say they would be very frightened by that. I mean, where would you stop? Would every teacher be carrying a gun? Would every member of staff be carrying a gun inside a school to protect something like this? The civilians in the surrounding area couldn't have got in any quicker to help. And if we're worried about things going wrong, what happens if a teacher suddenly had a moment of panic? And, you know, it feels like more guns to us here in the UK can't be the solution. So explain how it would work.
It'd be hard to find a piece that's pro-Russian.
Well, here in northern Russia, the Russian army is under attack from so-called illegal armed groups, and the Russians are hitting back with all they've got, with the Air Force, with artillery, and with infantry. This is a huge military exercise, codenamed Zapad 2017. Zapad means West.
And therefore, our media is the world news from a British perspective. Now, to be a good journalist, you need training and contacts to get that scoop that nobody else would. And to get good training, you need money. To get good contacts, you need to build trust. To build trust, you need to act professional. Now, media businesses thrive on the trust of advertisers to put brands on the same platforms as the media. Rarely do commercial entities invest in personnel who pose a risk to their business, who would step out of line and break that trust of the advertisers. Advertisers try to sell their brand to the most people. That's the idea of advertising, right? But they don't want to devalue their brand through controversies such as racism, sexism or fake news. Commercial programs edge towards more liberal opinions. Fear of being controversial would mean losing revenue. And even the BBC advertises movies and books on its chat shows. So in that sense, they are a commercial advertiser. Now in a chat show or interview, the host will inevitably push their own viewpoint in the questioning or comedy that might surround it.
But now, I won't ask you about your political opinions, but we do have a picture that suggests...
But you're not going to ask me because you already know.
No. Here you are with a lovely piñata.
The host's job is to make the celebrity guests feel comfortable while at the same time creating an entertaining show. Help the celebrities sell their own brand on the platform of the show. If the show became too controversial, the show's audience would be too different from the target market of the movie / book or celebrity.
So this is quite interesting. So Ewan McGregor, who was supposed to be our big guest in a few minutes, has just tweeted this. Was going on Good Morning Britain, didn't realise Piers Morgan was host, won't go on with him after his comments about the Women's March.
Shows which host them are liberal too, in order to get them to come on, and so do the media companies who own those chat shows. Now the BBC forces licence fee payers to pay for their service. Therefore they try and stay clear of slip-ups, and they try and remain impartial. But the government wants to make sure the BBC spends its money responsibly. And where there's money to buy and sell information, there's corruption. Talent can be bought from commercial media or by trusted government associates. Then the cycle begins again, where trust is needed, so offence and controversialism is avoided. Behold, the liberal elite. Now the BBC might say they criticise Corbyn and May equally, therefore they're impartial. But then when you look in the detail, you'll see that they have painted Corbyn in a very anti-Semitic light.
I would like to clarify with you something that I think there's some confusion about still. Which bit of Netanyahu's tweet do you say is false? I'm still not entirely clear, because there's a photo of you with a wreath, and that wreath appears to have been laid by the graves of the Black September attackers. So did you lay that wreath on those graves or by those graves? So to be clear, because I really don't want to...
I'm totally clear. I'm totally clear.
So you did lay a wreath.
In memory of all those that died in the 1985 Israeli attack.
But was that wreath not laid by the graves of those who were killed in the Mossad strike in Paris in '92?
It was laid.
And you did take part in laying a wreath. You said a moment ago that your view is that the way to get to peace is to engage with people and to talk to people. And you've said that you've shared platforms with people who you disagree with entirely as a means to doing that. But I wonder on how many occasions you've shared a platform or been at that kind of conference with members of the Israeli government, and whether you've ever laid a wreath at the graves of Israelis killed in Palestinian attacks. You said yesterday, I think, that you were there at that ceremony, but that you didn't think you took part in the wreath laying. But I think you're now saying that you were part of the wreath laying. I absolutely, I see what you're saying, but there were also graves there for those who were killed in '92, where there is not universal condemnation of that, if you see what I mean. I mean, Luciana Berger, when we were at a point of saying that you were there, but you didn't think that you'd actually taken part, said that being there should get an apology. Now I think we're a step further. So do you not... I mean, clearly Luciana Berger, as a Jewish MP, wants an apology for your having been there.
No, I'm not...
Do you consider attacks on Palestinians by Israel to be acts of terror? Does that mean that you consider the Israeli government to be a terrorist organisation almost?
Depending on what side of the spectrum you're on, you may or may not disagree with me on that. But then if you look at the way they portray Trump compared to Obama, you'll see they portray Trump in a negative light compared to Obama as the nice guy. Barack Obama chokes up giving Ellen DeGeneres Medal of Freedom. What a nice guy. Obama refuses ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, but donates instead. Barack Obama's words of advice for Kanye West. President Obama tears up during gun control speech. Trump comments the last thing Theresa May needed. Aerial view of anti-Trump protest. President Trump, I didn't criticise the Prime Minister. What Trump could learn from the Queen. Because as I said earlier, talent won't associate itself with controversy in order to get the funding from advertisers who probably employ them in some way, shape or form. So Hollywood hates Trump. Therefore, the BBC also hates Trump in order to keep those contacts with Hollywood. You'll find lots of liberal feature stories, such as this week is the Big British Asian Summer, which is fine. Feature stories are fine in themselves because they highlight the issues at hand, such as the Asian community's inability to accept homosexuality. But then if you look at it in the context of factual information that the mainstream media is so good at that has been left out, such as the grooming gang scandal, then it seems like they have more of an agenda than they otherwise would. The scheduling of TV programmes are very parliamentarian. I'll get onto that later. And then of course they link content together. I'll get onto that later as well. The mainstream media also has a big superiority complex. So if a big media company has so much funding and resources, they should be able to get every bit of national interest information to us, right? Well, you're wrong, because they deliberately turn a blind eye to things that they know, but we don't, because they don't want to upset the brands who pay them and got them to where they were.
James, I think, first of all, xenophobia has always been part of this country, and I put it down as the United Kingdom, you can go back as far as the Saxons and the Normans and the Romans. There was always xenophobia. But I think the current situation goes back a little bit further than Osama bin Laden, and it goes back, I think, to the late 70s, early 80s. You had an influx of immigrants coming into this country, quite rightly, looking for a better life, and the Muslim Council of Great Britain came out with a statement where they said they will not be happy until this country is ruled by Sharia law.
What year was that?
And James, I think it was end of 70s, early 80s. It is something I can remember watching on the news. I can remember reading it in the papers. And they said they will not be happy until their flag is flying over Downing Street.
The Muslim Council of Britain was only founded in 1997. Usually when you ring this radio station, you get away with stuff like this, but not between 10 and 1, mate. You just can't. You know, someone's got to make a stand. It's just not true what you said, and you're going away convinced that it still is. Take care, mate. God bless.
Now, I think you can even hear Howard there is trying to retreat a bit and sort of say, look, I'm not against you, buddy. You know, I am a little bit politically correct. I am a little bit on your side. And it still didn't show him any mercy because he stated some facts. And that's a big no-no. You know, you're lying, James. You're lying blatantly. Hizb ut-Tahrir, which claims to be non-violent organisation, has been banned by virtually every country in the Muslim world. But it has a legal presence in Britain and has in the past commanded a strong following on several university campuses. Despite this, Hizb ut-Tahrir is shunned by all other Muslim organisations. National pan-Islamist political organisation founded in the 50s.
And journalists have to stay within a very strict code of conduct. They come up with labels and branding. So they'll come up with a label such as far-right or alt-right. Then they'll show some violence and hate and give it that label.
Has died in Charlottesville, Virginia, in clashes between white supremacists and anti-fascist groups which have rocked the city. Several people have been injured after a car ploughed into the crowd.
Then they'll take a revolutionist such as Tommy Robinson or Nigel Farage and give him the same label as a way of shutting them down or dismissing their opinion.
They say you were called a fascist and a racist.
Then they'll give the revolutionist story small to no airtime and disable comments on any video that they're in.
Well, the real danger is that today's our national conference, you're the BBC, your job is to be a public service broadcaster and to ask us what our policies are, what our aims are and what the electoral difficulties are, but you don't appear to be very interested.
Online, blaming that on racism, because journalists prefer to give attention to the establishment who they've worked hard to get contacts with to make that scoop. Linked content. This is where they find a negative story, such as the high street collapsing, and then they blame it on Brexit and the internet instead of covering all the potential facts.
It'll have to be something very different to get us off the internet and onto the high street. Samantha Fennick, BBC News.
Those kind of pieces tend to be speculative anyway. Or they'll make a report about Brexit and then they'll follow it with a report on the pound falling. The commercial world doesn't mind advertising on papers that blame immigrants for everything because they get big audiences. But when it happens online, the liberal elite screams xenophobia in fear of losing business from the declining mainstream. Our way of doing everything is changing from the way we deal with the EU to the way we consume media, and they're terrified. So they're not just choosing what they show, but when they show it.
Now, the so-called tainted blood scandal of the 1970s and 80s led to around 7,000 people with haemophilia contracting HIV and hepatitis through contaminated blood products.
Featured content. So this is when you talk about a long story or a scandal, something that's not immediate breaking news, something that goes on for a while. And featured content normally comes on a slow news day or midway through the news bulletins. Featured content doesn't need to be reported on that day. It's featured content. It's like a magazine feature or an ongoing scandal. It's not necessarily breaking news. And it's not just to fill time, but to kind of explore a narrative and build up a much bigger story. The online world is pretty much all featured content. It's all about putting your opinions, analysing and writing about, blogging, vlogging, speculating the news. It's not about reporting the news because the online world, does, as I say, doesn't have access to reporters like the mainstream media does. They can't make those scoops. You never see online personalities featured in these featured contents, apart from in lazy Twitter journalism. And I sort of think, well, if online people, online news channels are so good at developing the long story and talking about the long story, why are we not seeing more online personalities employed in the mainstream media? Media businesses go towards personnel, journalists of least risk, and that means journalists who are trained professionally. Now, they do employ, for example, YouTube stars as radio presenters, but you'll very rarely see an online personality employed as a journalist.
Now, the world's highest paid YouTube star, PewDiePie, has apologised after using the N-word during an online broadcast.
Internet impartiality. This is where the mainstream media picks an internet personality and they report on everything they do just to get clicks on their own website. Then they make them seem controversial and keep attacking them, until eventually the platform that hosts this internet personality is forced to take action against them.
In a statement, YouTube acknowledged that it had taken a long time to respond, but that it also had been listening to comments and criticisms. It added that it recognised the actions of one creator could affect the whole community. And it said it would soon announce steps to make sure any similar videos were never circulated again.
This leads to platform reputational damage, and so the platform mitigates that with censorship.
YouTube has deleted all of Alex Jones's channels.
Meanwhile, the mainstream media outlets disable their own comments on their own media. Russia demonization. This is where they basically blame Russia for everything. They inaccurately report on Syria.
I think there is a realpolitik case for saying that it's been a hideous war, the Russians and Assad have behaved hideously, but actually it's better for this thing to finish.
They haven't behaved any more hideously than we or our allies have behaved in Fallujah or now in Mosul.
Come on, they have behaved, I mean, you've got people trapped in eastern Aleppo as we sit here, 300,000 people there that are being bombed every day. They've bombed the hospitals, now they've bombed the schools.
Well, our sources for this are people inside Eastern Aleppo. There hasn't, as far as I know, been a single independent Western journalist in Eastern Aleppo. We rely entirely on propaganda sources, on pictures which always show wounded children being carried by noble unarmed men in heaps of rubble, and we rely on this and we take it as read. You never see any of this kind of reporting from Mosul or from Fallujah, where similar things have happened, which have been done by our side. Yeah. And this blackening of the Russians just seems to me to be particularly ridiculous.
Well, they speculated on evidence for the Novichok deaths despite not having it present. They basically took the government's word as the truth. And then, before the World Cup, there were a lot of negative documentaries. If you compare it to the Brazil World Cup, Russia was portrayed as a corrupt, cold, horrible country. Well, Brazil was this warm, yes, they had class barriers in the favelas, but it was this warm, samba dancing nation. Russia never gets the same PR. So last year, the BBC was in a gender pay gap scandal because they were giving male stars more money than female stars. So this year, they moved a certain number of programmes into the BBC studios, said that they didn't need to reveal their pay because it's for commercial purposes. Have you noticed that the schedule of programmes that aren't the news tend to be very parliamentarious? And what I mean by that is that almost all the shows seem to either be a potential debate in Parliament or just completely wash over what's really happening. So instead of getting comedies and dramas more often these days, you get things like Eat Well for Less, telling people how to eat more healthily on a lower budget. Now, if that's not saying a massive subliminal political message, I'm not sure what else is. And there's so many cheap police-following documentary-style fly-on-the-wall programs nowadays as well. And then when a journalist makes a big political scoop, you'll hardly ever see them quote that scoop. Why? Because they don't want to quote their sources, they don't want to break that trust so they can get a scoop in the future. But of course, we never really know if the journalists themselves are bending the truth or lying a little bit. So the mainstream media is never going to be impartial. It's losing to alternative media anyway. If you believe that the mainstream media is best, then you wouldn't be watching this video, you wouldn't be on the internet at all. In fact, the internet wouldn't even be a thing, because people would still be watching their TVs. It's obviously become its own echo chamber of capitalism, the government, and the liberal elite, who associate with the same brands who pay their bills. It's basically the rich talking to the rich, and people are tuning out. But do you agree with me? Join in the debate below and subscribe.